We're going to talk about the fall of the Soviet Union in this session. Christmas, December 1991, President Mikhail Gorbachev announces that the Soviet Union has been dissolved and that he is resigning. So let's think about significances here. This ended the world's most powerful communist state. It ended the Warsaw Pact. Of course, the Warsaw Pact had been unraveling in the 2 years prior to this. It ended the Cold War. It led to the establishment of new sovereign states. Those constituent republics of the Soviet Union now become sovereign countries. Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and I could go on. It brings to the end what political scientists call the bipolar arrangement during the Cold War, where global events tended to revolve around either the United States and its allies or the Soviet Union and its allies, a bipolar two-axis. This arrangement, of course, has ended with the fall of the Soviets. The fear of massive nuclear war also is diminished with the end of the Cold War. And finally, the apparent triumph of market economies and liberal democracies as the Soviets recede into history. I'm going to give you some long-term causes for the fall of the Soviets. First, the Soviet failure in Afghanistan. Mikhail Gorbachev he withdrew the Soviet Red Army from Afghanistan in the late 80s. The problem was that there's no plan for reintegrating these massive number of troops back into an economy that was already stagnant. The failure in Afghanistan also reduced the Russian people's confidence in their leadership. The Red Army is supposed to be the most powerful in the world, and here it is limping home, wounded, after spending 8 years in Afghanistan. Another factor in the fall of the Soviets, President Reagan introduced the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, and I think it was '83. This pressed the Soviets to try to keep up with this sort of technologically innovative American economy, and they're not able to do so. And then in the mid-'80s, I guess it was '86, there was a disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear plant in a little town called Pripyat in Ukraine. This also lessened the Russian people's confidence in Soviet leadership. Another factor is the failure of centralized planning. The communist command economy, this centralized planning, is based not on the market, not on supply and demand, but on committees making decisions about how much steel to produce, how much wheat to grow, how many cows, how many pigs. Committees can't respond to consumer needs, consumer demands, the way the market does. And then the computer revolution revealed a rather stagnant Soviet system without the capacity to respond to consumer desires. This is tied directly to the failure of the command economy. Think about it like this, a command economy. Stalin can order men to dig a canal, or he can order people to build a factory, or to construct a blast furnace. And workers can do these things. They may not do it efficiently, they may not do it profitably, but they can do it. But Gorbachev in the late '80s could not order anybody to write a new computer program or to develop a more efficient silicon chip. People have to want to do these sort of tasks. They can't be ordered. So Soviet leaders could command physical labor, but they could not command imaginative and innovative thought. In addition, another factor is the collapse of totalitarian regimes. The liberal democratic model became increasingly popular across the globe. There's a decline in the legitimacy of state brutality. We still see it. Some of you, you can YouTube it if you'd like, but you can look at the Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing in 1989 and see that state power can still be quite brutal. Nevertheless, there is a decline in the legitimacy of these methods. Borders are increasingly open, permeable. People are moving back and forth across borders. There's a new kind of domino effect here. where achievement of liberty in one country will prompt rebellions in the countries next door as they too want to achieve sort of a liberal democracy instead of totalitarian rule. Widespread anti-imperialism as well cast doubt on decrepit empires like the Soviet Union. Now, with that said, I want to talk about short-term causes of the Soviet collapse. The last Soviet president, of course, is Mikhail Gorbachev. He is a dedicated communist. He is going to attempt to revitalize and reform this rather stagnant communist system, and his attempt backfires. Two key terms here, glasnost, and we'll spell it here for you. This means openness. It allows for plurality. Plurality meant that the Communist Party would no longer have a monopoly on political power in the Soviet Union. There's going to be other voices now. That one dominant voice, since Lenin and the Revolution in 1917, will now have to compete with other voices. This is revolutionary development, most unexpected. And then the second Gorbachev policy, second to glasnost, is perestroika. You could translate this as restructuring. What Gorbachev wants to do is to allow certain market innovations into this rather stagnant Soviet economy. Now, these reforms designed by Gorbachev to strengthen the Soviet Union have the opposite effect. It's kind of like Pandora's box. Once opened, glasnost and perestroika undo the Soviet system and cannot be controlled. The Warsaw Pact nations begin to break away and establish their own sovereign states. Remember the shock of Poland electing a non-communist president in the late 80s. He was from the Solidarity Trade Union. And then after Poland, you see the Warsaw Pact countries one by one, Czechoslovakia and Romania, begin to break away. The Russian Communist Party is diminished. Gorbachev unilaterally withdraws the Red Army from Eastern Europe. Gorbachev signs arms reduction treaties with both Presidents Reagan and Presidents Bush. The Berlin Wall falls in 1989, and Gorbachev has no objections to East and West Germany coming together and forming Germany again, an undivided Germany. This is most unexpected, shattering sort of developments that were welcomed by most people. No one ever believed that the Soviets would allow Germany to be reunited. Germany, after all, had invaded Russia twice in the 20th century. And when this reunification took place, it was a sight of great joy. So, some conclusions, the end game here. Think of the Soviet system as a sort of federalist structure like the United States. If you think of it like that, you think of all these different Soviet socialist republics, Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and Belarus and Ukraine and Armenia and Kazakhstan and on and on and on. If you think of all these Soviet socialist republics as states, like Georgia or Texas or California or Alabama and Florida, what if all these states begin to secede or withdraw from the United States? At the end of the day, what would the President of the United States be president of? This is what's happening in the Soviet Union. By 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev, who had been the second most powerful man in the world, is suddenly president of nothing. The Soviet Union no longer exists. Russia itself, the heart of the Soviet Union, has seceded and declared itself to be a sovereign state. So the Soviet Union ceases to exist. Russia elects its own president, Boris Yeltsin. And the Cold War ends with a whimper instead of a bang as the Soviet Union dies. Christmas, 1991. Thank you for your attention.